Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a plunge into some really fascinating market data.
Sounds good.
We're focusing specifically on the global motorcycle suspension systems market.
Right.
And our goal here really is to cut through all the complexity, bypass the dense data, and just pull out the key insights, the surprising trends.
Get to the heart of it.
Exactly. Using the great source material from cognitive market research, we're aiming for those aha moments that, well, leave you feeling genuinely informed.
And, what jumps out right away, right at the top, is just how clear and consistent the upward trend is for this market. It's quite specific, suspension systems. Globally, it was valued at roughly $395.7 million back in 2021.
Okay.
But the fascinating part is the projection. It's expected to hit nearly $500 million, about $499.8 million by 2025.
Wow.
And then really expand further, reaching almost $800 million to $797.5 million to be precise by 2033.
So basically doubling from 2021.
Pretty much. And that translates to a really robust compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, of just over 6%. So it's not like a sudden spike. It's steady, consistent climbing.
A solid 6% across the board. That's impressive for a whole segment. Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's maybe start regionally. How about North America? What's the data telling us there?
Okay, North America. It's what you'd probably call a more mature market, right?
Right.
It shows good, solid growth, consistent. It was valued at about $114.3 million in 2021.
Okay.
And the projection takes it to around $220 million by 2033. So it's maintaining a CAGR of roughly 5.5%.
5.5%. And I see here the U.S. Leads in sheer value. It started around $92.2 million in 21, heading towards over $174 million by 2033.
That's right.
But its CAGR is actually a bit lower, 5.28%. What's interesting, though, is Canada looks like it shows a stronger growth rate, almost 6.8% CAGR.
Yeah, exactly. Jumping from about $12.2 million up to $25.6 million.
Why the difference, do you think? Higher growth rate in Canada.
Well, that's a great point. You often see that in these more established markets like North America, countries with a smaller overall market size like Canada here.
Yeah.
They can often achieve higher percentage growth rates simply because they're starting from a lower base. There might be more room, relatively speaking, for new adoption or, market penetration.
Ah, that makes sense.
The U.S., being so large and mature already, tends to grow more stably, but maybe less explosively in percentage terms. Mexico's contributing nicely too, by the way, nearly 6% CAGR there, growing from just under 10 million to over 20 million.
Got it. So it's about where they are in their market life cycle, essentially.
Precisely.
All right, let's hop across the Atlantic. Europe. What's the story in the European market for these suspension systems?
Europe. Okay, it's another substantial market, no doubt, around $74.4 million back in 2021.
Okay.
But the growth rate is, well, slightly more moderate compared to North America, actually. It's forecasted to reach almost $142 million by 2033,
Right.
which gives it a CAGR just a touch above 5.4%. So still a steady climb, definitely, but maybe not the same kind of aggressive expansion we might see elsewhere.
So growing, yes, but maybe not quite as dynamic. Within Europe, who are the big players? Germany and France look key.
They are. Germany is expected to grow from about $11.3 million to over $20 million. That's a CAGR of around 4.8%.
Okay.
And France shows a slightly higher CAGR, actually, 6.2%, set to nearly double from $9.6 million to over $19.5 million.
Any other significant European countries jumping out?
Absolutely. You see consistent contributions from the UK, Italy, Russia, Spain, all showing solid growth, though the rates vary a bit.
How much variation?
Well, their sheds range from Spain's 4.3% up to Italy's 5.8%.
Yeah.
So, decent growth across the board there.
Yeah, that's low. Growing from $1.77 million to just $2.7 million over the forecast period.
But then you contrast that with this rest of Europe category. It's got the highest regional CAGR, nearly 6.9%. Right. That segment's effectively doubling, from $17.5 million to over $37.9 million by 2033.
That's a huge difference. What do you think explains that? Such strong growth in that collective restive group.
It is quite a disparity, isn't it? That rest of Europe bucket often includes smaller, maybe developing markets.
Okay.
So similar to the Canada point earlier, they might be starting from a lower base. But maybe they also have faster growing motorcycle adoption rates.
Yeah.
Or perhaps improving road infrastructure that encourages riding.
So untapped potential.
Exactly. It suggests there's real potential in those diverse, sometimes overlooked European nations, Meanwhile, a market like Denmark, maybe it's more mature, closer to saturation, or perhaps has unique factors, maybe regulatory or cultural, that limit motorcycle use.
That makes a lot of sense. Untapped potential is a good way to frame it. Okay, from Europe, let's head over to Asia Pacific. This is the region everyone talks about for global growth, right?
hmm
Do the numbers for motorcycle suspension systems back that up? Does it show that massive potential?
Oh, absolutely they do. This region is, well, it's truly the powerhouse for this market.
Okay.
It was valued at nearly $158 million back in 2021. And the projection, almost $336 million by 2033.
Wow.
It's a strong CAGR, over 6.6%.
Yeah.
And if you connect that to the bigger picture, I mean, this region isn't just growing fast on its own. It's driving a huge chunk of the entire global growth for this industry.
Right, the engine room, basically. And within APAC, China's clearly leading in value, around $48.7 million in 21, heading over the $100 million mark by 33.
Yep, with a KGR just over 6.1%.
Japan's also significant, $30 million up to over $61 million. Similar CGR, but what about other countries there? Any stands there?
India. India shows really significant momentum. It actually leads the entire region with the highest KGR, over 7.4%.
7.4%, that's substantial.
It really is. To put that in perspective, that growth rate means its market value is set to more than double, from nearly $22 million in 2021 to almost $50 million by 2033. That's rapid expansion.
What's behind that, do you think?
Well, it likely speaks to increasing disposable incomes, urbanization, and just the sheer importance of motorcycles as primary transport in a rapidly developing economy like India's.
That doubling is, yeah, quite remarkable. And we also see Singapore with a strong CGR over 7.1%. And Southeast Asia as a block shows considerable growth, too, almost $15 million up to nearly $33 million. That's almost a 7% CGR. So a lot of dynamism across the board.
And look, here's that familiar pattern again. The rest of APAC segment, it recorded an even more impressive KGR, 8.678%.
Wow, the highest in the region.
Highest in the region, yeah. Going from about $15.5 million to nearly $39 million by 2033. Again, it just highlights that immense distributed growth happening across many of the smaller or emerging economies within Asia Pacific.
Fascinating. Okay, heading south now. Let's turn to South America. Is it showing a similar high growth pattern?
It definitely is. South America is another really high growth region. It was valued around $26.9 million in 2021. And it's expected to more than double, reaching over $61.4 million by 2033. That gives it an impressive KGR of just over 7%.
Right up there with APAC's faster growers. Brazil seems to be the leader there. Nearly $8.5 million in 21, projected to hit almost $18.8 million. CAGR around 6.7%. Solid.
Very solid. And worth highlighting Argentina, too. It shows a remarkably high CAGR, over 7.6%.
Even higher than Brazil's rate.
Yeah, growing from about $3.5 million to almost $8.5 million by 2033. That could indicate, a burgeoning motorcycle culture there, or maybe increasing demand for reliable transport options.
Makes sense.
And while Brazil and Argentina grab the headlines, you've also got countries like Colombia, Peru, Chile. They're all showing consistent growth in their smaller but definitely developing markets. They all contribute to that regional momentum.
And the rest of South America.
Also showing robust growth, projected at a 7.4% CAGR, so really strong across that continent.
Okay, 2 more regions to touch on. Let's shift gears to the Middle East. What kind of growth are we seeing there?
The Middle East market.
Yeah.
It's smaller, certainly, compared to the powerhouses like APAC or South America.
Right.
But still growing steadily. It was around $14.6 million in 2021, increasing to nearly $23.8 million by 2033. That's a KGR of about 4.4%.
Okay, so more moderate growth, a bit like some of the European markets, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a fair comparison.
Key markets look like Saudi Arabia, starting at $5.7 million with a 4.1% CAGR, and Turkey, smaller at $1.9 million, around 3.9% CAGR. Anything else stand out there?
Well, the UAE shows a slightly higher KGR, just over 5.5%.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, indicates maybe a bit stronger growth dynamics within that particular economy.
Okay. And finally, let's look at Africa. What's the data tell us about the motorcycle suspension market on the African continent?
Africa's market, much like the Middle East, is smaller in total value currently, but it does show steady expansion. It stood at around $7.5 million in 2021.
Okay.
And it's forecasted to grow to nearly $14.5 million by 2033, so almost doubling.
And the Sikh effect?
About 4.5%. So again, steady growth.
And Nigeria and South Africa look like significant contributors there.
They are, yes. And interestingly, that rest of Africa segment, again, shows a slightly higher CDR, almost 5%.
That rest of category really seems to be a consistent theme across regions, doesn't it?
It It really does. It points towards that broad-based growth happening in many diverse emerging markets globally.
Okay, so we've done a whirlwind tour of the globe. We've gone from large established markets to these rapidly burgeoning economies. What does it all mean when you pull it together? What's the big picture takeaway?
Well, synthesizing all these findings, I think the clearest takeaway is that the global motorcycle suspension systems market is definitely experiencing strong and consistent growth pretty much everywhere. That's a great sign for the industry's overall health.
Right.
But the detailed regional and country data, that really reveals a dynamic landscape, doesn't it? What really stands out is Asia Pacific and South America. They're showing particularly high, sometimes even explosive growth rates.
Yeah, those CAGRs were impressive.
Exactly. Yeah. Which strongly suggests these regions are really key to the market's future expansion, likely driven by, things like increasing urbanization, rising incomes, the growing need for motorcycles for daily commuting.
Makes sense.
Meanwhile, the more mature markets, like North America and Europe, they're maintaining steady growth. Slower, yes, but still steady, indicating stable ongoing demand there.
That really does paint a well-informed picture. It puts the nuances behind those headline global growth numbers. We've covered a huge amount of ground here, from that overall expansion to seeing the surprising differences in growth speed across continents and even within them.
It does give you a complete view. And, this raises an important question, something maybe for you, the listener, to ponder. Given these clear trends, these varying speeds of growth we've talked about, especially those higher KGRs in emerging markets and in all those restive categories, what underlying factors do you believe are really fueling these differences across the global motorcycle suspension market? What might this tell us about, say, broader economic development patterns or maybe specific motorcycle adoption trends in these really diverse parts of the world?
That's an excellent question to think about. Really gets you connecting the dots. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. Remember, all the insights we shared came directly from the detailed research by Cognitive Market Research. We hope you'll consider these trends further. Until next time. Welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into the really dynamic world of motorcycle suspension systems.
It's a fascinating area.
It is. And our mission, using some great insights from Cognitive Market Research, is basically to unpack what's driving this market.
Right.
The key factors, the roadblocks, future trends, really getting into that balance between cost, performance, and rider safety.
Yeah, and it's quite a balancing act. What's really interesting looking at the research isn't just the huge volume from Asia Pacific.
Yeah, places like India, China, massive production numbers.
Exactly. Millions of bikes a year. So naturally, huge demand for suspension that's, well, cost effective. Reliable too, of course.
But you're saying there's more to it.
Oh, yeah. The real story, I think, is how that intense pressure for affordability, it's actually forcing manufacturers to get clever.
How so?
Well, innovating in areas like modular design, more efficient production. And these breakthroughs, they could actually ripple outwards, even influence the higher-end market.
That's a great point. Innovation born out of necessity. It's quite a contrast, isn't it, to what we see elsewhere?
Like North America and Europe.
Exactly. Where there's this rising demand for high-performance bikes, premium models, think adventure bikes, sport bikes.
Right, they're pushing the envelope on suspension tech. They want advanced stuff.
Yeah.
Better adjustability, more responsiveness.
And it's not just about speed or track times anymore, is it? Would you say safety and comfort are just as important now?
Absolutely. Definitely. I mean, think about it. People are using bikes for longer trips, daily commutes even.
Sure.
So they expect, better shock absorption, more stability. It's not just a nice to have.
It's about reducing fatigue,
Okay.
enhancing control.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that makes these improved components a really big selling point, even filtering down to mid-range bikes now.
Okay, so we've got these amazing tech advancements on one side, and this dual demand basic, affordable systems and high-tech ones. What's stopping the advanced tech from just taking over everywhere? What are the main hurdles?
Well, the biggest one, no surprise, is price. Extreme price sensitivity.
Especially in those developing commuter markets you mentioned.
Exactly. Every single dollar, every cent, it impacts that final sticker price. So manufacturers often have to stick with very basic, non-adjustable suspension.
Right.
It just makes it incredibly tough for the fancy stuff, the advanced tech, to really get traction where the sheer volume is.
And it's not just the initial bike cost, right? I mean, adding semi-active or electronic suspension.
What?
that can add thousands.
Easily,
Okay.
which pushes them firmly into the top-tier luxury bike category.
But beyond that initial price shock, what about later, down the road, after the sale?
That's a really critical point. These advanced systems, they often need specialized servicing, special parts,
Ah,
which
okay.
just aren't always available, if you're in a rural area or maybe a less developed region.
So that adds to the long-term cost of ownership.
It certainly does. And that can definitely put people off, even if they could maybe stretch to the initial purchase price.
Makes sense. Still, despite those barriers, things are changing. The market is evolving. What are the biggest trends you're seeing emerge right now in suspension?
The most significant, I'd say, is the growth in semi-active electronic systems. It's really taking off.
The ones that adjust themselves.
Yeah, basically. They use sensors, talk to the bike's ECU, its brain, in real time,
Mm-hmm.
and they dynamically adjust the damping. So you get optimal performance whether you're on a smooth highway or a bumpy back road.
That sounds pretty impressive.
It is. We're seeing like double-digit growth in that segment. It's almost becoming standard kit in touring and adventure categories now.
Wow, that's a huge technological leap. And it connects to something you mentioned earlier, that sort of cascading effect. Premium features moving down market. Can you give an example in suspension?
Sure, a classic one is upside-down forks,
Mm.
USD forks.
Okay.
Their design, being inverted, offers much better rigidity, and it reduces what we call unsprung weight.
That's the weight the suspension doesn't support directly, like the wheel itself.
Exactly. Less unsprung weight means the wheel can react faster to bumps. Better contact, better handling.
And these used to be only on high-end sport bikes.
Pretty much, yeah. But now,
Yeah.
you see them all the time on entry-level bikes, mid-displacement models, especially in markets like India, Southeast Asia.
So that shows a clear pathway, doesn't it? Innovation's spreading out.
Definitely. It shows how tech can become more accessible over time.
Fascinating. And one last thing of materials. There's a big push for lighter materials too, isn't there? What's the impact there?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it ties back to reducing unsprung weight and just generally improving handling.
So swapping steel for aluminum.
Exactly. In things like swing arms, triple clamps, fork parts, manufacturers are really focused on shaving off grams wherever they can, using aluminum alloys and sometimes even more exotic stuff on the really high-end bikes.
So better performance without sacrificing strength.
That's the goal. Engineering innovation really driving performance.
Okay, so summing up then. What we've really seen is this motorcycle suspension market doing this incredibly intricate balancing act.
Yeah, it really is.
Caught between, the demand for rock bottom cost, the constant push for better performance, and this growing emphasis on rider safety and comfort.
It's true. You've got emerging markets focused on volume, on affordability,
Mm-hmm.
which drives its own kind of baseline innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have mature markets really pushing the technological limits, developing these sophisticated systems.
A real divergence, but also, as you said, convergence as tech trickles down.
Precisely.
Right. So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to ponder. As these features, these once premium suspension technologies, become more common, maybe even standard, on more accessible bikes, how might that change the whole riding experience for everyone?